guests tonight are Niles and Frasier Mercado. They're the authors of Bush Killing Reagan, an investigation into the assassination attempt of Ronald Reagan on March 30th, 1981. How you both doing tonight?
We're doing great. How you doing?
Very well. Thanks for coming on the show.
Oh, thanks for having us. It's a real honor.
Yep.
Well, listen, I read your book, read it twice actually.
Oh, wow.
Went through it, and so the standard account or the official narrative of the shooting of Ronald Reagan was one John Hinckley Jr. Shot the president on the afternoon of March 30th, 1981, as he emerged from a hotel in Washington D.C. And he did it to impress an actress, a former Disney star named Jodie Foster. And that's where it ended. And he pled, I guess he pled not guilty by reason of insanity, and was not convicted. And he spent many years at St. Elizabeth Hospital, and now is a free man, from what I understand, or more or less a free man. So what's wrong with that account? How do you want to get into the story?
Well, it ended better than it started, right? So you are right. He is a free man walking around, and I think he checks in once a month at a mental health facility. So he goes to therapy once a month, but he is a free man. But at the beginning of that story is where we have a problem. The idea that he did this to impress Jodie Foster is kind of a tip-off. That was kind of our first tip-off to really investigate this case, because typically what you will see whenever they have the lone nut thing that they're pushing, especially in connection with political assassination attempts, is you'll see some ridiculous motive that's being presented. And that was true of even remember with RFK, with Sirhan Sirhan, you had he had some newspaper article in his pocket that they said that when they made something about the newspaper article,
basically a note saying, I did it and here's why, that they attached to somebody else's clothing.
Right. So, I mean, that's usually they have this, very tiny, very meaningless cover story. So, yeah, I mean, and to make it so ridiculous, and then people start thinking about Jodie Foster and the movie she's been in and what's her reaction to it. And there's even footage of her reacting to it. And, and she's obviously very uncomfortable. But, the idea that someone shot an important person because of her made her uncomfortable. And then everyone can start talking about this other thing, when in reality it's really it really distracts everyone from, the plain fact that the Hinckleys and the Bushes were tightly connected. They did business together. They had blood together. They were 6th, 7th, they were 7th, 8th, and 9th cousins. We can go into the details on that. We can crack into that. But I mean, the real story was that the Hinckley family, which is deeply tied with the Bush family, had their son try to kill the president so that their cousin would become president. And that was the story, and instead they throw out the red herring of the Jodie Foster story.
Now, you say they were closely tied to the Bushes. There were, I think, several, like 6th or 7th cousins, I think you said?
Yeah, they're actually they're cousins by they're established cousins by 3 different relations. So that actually makes them 6th, 7th, and 7th, 8th, and 9th cousins.
Okay.
And yeah, there's a claim about 6th cousins as well, but in terms of what we can really establish from genealogy, from all the genealogical sources that we're able to research, there are those 3. That's pretty, it's pretty tight already.
It should be noted that the day of the assassination attempt, ABC's Charles Murphy reported on national television that Bush Sr.'s son, Neil Bush, was scheduled to have dinner with John Hinckley Jr.'s brother, Scott. I mean, I guess coincidence of all coincidences, but that dinner was canceled after the news reporting of it, not because of the assassination attempt. So a lot of these amazing, groundbreaking, sensationalist, news stories came out the day of. But like so many other, assassination attempts.
Right. That's the last you ever hear of it. Exactly.
Down the memory hole, I guess.
Down the memory hole, exactly.
Yeah. Now, what you're saying is that here we have the alleged shooter of the president, the would-be assassin of the president of the United States. His brother is having dinner with the son of the vice president of the United States, who, if the president dies, becomes the president.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
And that's only reported once or twice. I know it was in a couple of newspapers. I think the Houston Post, San Francisco Chronicle had it for one day, and I think John Chancellor reported it too on NBC News and called it a bizarre coincidence with no investigation.
Right, no investigation. And then, but what's interesting is when you do the investigation, you realize that Scott Hinckley had very important business with Neil Bush, namely that Vanderbilt Energy, right, which, again, there's a whole story behind that. But Vanderbilt Energy was about to be fined for like $2 million, right? And they were going to have a meeting about, hey, how do we get them off our case? How do we make this go away? That kind of thing. And so that was kind of at the crux of probably why they had to meet. And obviously, the assassination attempt really shifted the power balance in the White House, where the Bushes were really in a much better position to be able to help them. Obviously, if they became president, they can make it go away very easily. But even not becoming president, Reagan got the message, and we can talk about that in a little bit. About how his presidency changed. But it's important to understand that Scott Hinckley was working for Vanderbilt Energy. Vanderbilt Energy was headed by John Hinckley Sr., right, the shooter's father, and Scott Hinckley's father. And Vanderbilt Energy used to be Vanderbilt Oil until it was bailed out by Zapata Oil. And Zapata Oil was essentially a CIA front that was also George Bush's business. That was his he's referred to as an oil man, and Zapata Oil is that oil company. And so they came along and bailed out his seventh cousin when Vanderbilt Oil was having trouble, and then that's when it became Vanderbilt Energy. Mm-hmm. So that's just one of the many connections between George Bush Sr. and the Hinckley.
So you have the Bushes who are tied to oil and intelligence. Of course, the president, George H.W. Bush, being the former director of Central Intelligence.
Right. And that incidentally is another major tie to the Hinckleys, right? Because when he was heading the CIA, they funneled quite a bit of money. And again, it wasn't exclusively during his term as CIA director, but it is significant, right, that while he was CIA director, he funneled through USAID and through the State Department, he funneled all sorts of money to World Vision. We can get into what World Vision is, but it's basically a nonprofit that was also headed by John Hinckley. So John Hinckley Sr. was head of Vanderbilt Oil, which became Vanderbilt Energy, and head of World Vision, which was a nonprofit concern, which was basically used as a recruitment, basically used to run refugee camps in order to recruit for the CIA.
Yeah, there's a long history of charitable organizations, particularly missionaries, being fronts for corporations and intelligence. And if you look at the corporate world is where created the intelligence agencies. It's like Wall Street and the CIA, they're tied at the hip. It's like same thing with the City of London and, the British India Company and British intelligence and banking and all that. It's all tied in together.
Right.
So this notion of World Vision, which I think ostensibly is there to help refugees from the various wars that the military-industrial complex conjures up around the world.
Right, but if you think about it, what is it, and we make this point in the book, and I'm sure you're familiar with the point, that what is a refugee camp, right? I mean, just take a moment and think about it. And, normally we think of, old women and children that are displaced, right? And that's the normal picture you have in your mind. But also, there's lots of young men and young women, young able-bodied women that are there why are they in a refugee camp, right? They're there because of some regime that they must not be too happy with to end up in a refugee camp, right? That they're fleeing from. And it's a perfect spot to recruit for CIA if you want to take down that regime. And now you have the enemies, or at least the people that have been the most impacted negatively by this regime you want to take down or control or co-opt. And so they're all congregated already in a refugee camp. That's why it's a perfect cover, and that's really the reason why World Vision is getting money from the CIA, from the USAID, and so forth. It's not to help anybody really. It's for that purpose.
Yeah, USAID is kind of like It's the quintessential cover. It's a good example is Barack Obama's mother worked for USAID.
Right. I didn't know that. I knew she worked for the Ford Foundation, but that's an interesting little detail.
Yeah, and the Ford Foundation, another example of intelligence and the corporate world and all working together. Ford is often funnels money for CIA and various operations.
Right. Actually, we're going to get into that in our next book about killing Ford, which is a whole other thing. And we get into the Rockefeller Foundation, the Ford Foundation, how they tried to transform America.
Another significance of World Vision is that it has a connection to another an assassin, Mark David Chapman, who killed John Lennon a few months prior.
That's exactly right. Yeah. So let's turn over. Actually, I should mention too, we have this free report that we're giving to your listeners. If they go to sixfigureteam.com/Reagan, and you can kind of get all the diagrams from the book. And one of the diagrams we had was for World Vision International, and it's all about that, all about how World Vision's used for CIA recruitment, and basically, Mark David Chapman, as you bring out, and Frasier really did most of it on this front. Maybe you could talk to them about Mark David Chapman, how that was done at the trial balloon.
Right. So before the Reagan assassination attempt, you had the successful assassination of John Lennon, and the assassin, or supposed assassin, Mark David Chapman. There are a lot of similarities around the circumstances and the person of Mark David Chapman. Well, for one thing, they're both obsessed with catching their eye. Both situations, you have eyewitnesses and ballistics evidence that suggests more than one gun being fired from multiple angles. And we'll get that a little bit more with Bush Killing Reagan. Judy Woodruff from NBC News reports, as it is happening, that there is a second shooter on the overhang of the Hilton Hotel, that shots are being fired from a Secret Service agent. And from overhead near the roof, she points up. She points upwards. So, maybe Judy Woodruff from the NBC News, maybe she doesn't know what she's talking about. Maybe she just has her story wrong. And the same thing happened with John Lennon, where you had eyewitnesses saying that there was more than one shooter. There was multiple gunshots, more shots than could have come from Mark David Chapman's gun. And
then you get also the issue of the ridiculous motives, right? Okay, so and with the Reagan assassination attempt, he was obsessed with Jodie Foster. With John Lennon, he thought that Lennon was a phony, right?
Yeah,
that was the given motive.
That was like Holden Caulfield thing with the Catcher in the Rye, correct? I was trying to make that connection or something.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. But another thing is also I read Fenton Breslau's book, Who Killed John Lennon, and he raised a number of points in that book that are worth attention. But one was, I don't think it was in the book, it was subsequently revealed that the doorman was Jose Perdomo for that one night, and that name shares a member of Operation 40, a former Cuban member of the Cubans from the
right, the anti-Castro Cubans.
Anti-Castro Cubans, and so the inference there is perhaps the real assassin was the doorman.
Right.
Yeah.
And because there were shots too in the John Lennon case. There were shots that simply couldn't have come from Mark David Chapman's a weapon. Because they were too perfectly. The coroner described it, I believe, is that it was there were two bullets that went in through the same hole perfectly as if from a sharpshooter. Yeah. Right. So I don't know if he was necessarily the killer as much as there to make sure that make sure that the theater was set up properly for a sharpshooter at a distance.
Well, the important point is it's not a question. Is obviously what we're saying is there are other shooters or an expert shooter, and Mark David Chapman was the patsy. He's there to show up and fire. If you've ever seen the movie The Parallax View.
Yes.
Excellent film.
Alan J. Pula.
Kind of like that. Where he just shows, he's there to show up and fire the gun, kind of like Sirhan was, and fire a gun off and to get the plane.
It would be one thing if this was just based on eyewitness testimony. Because, look, I've never been through, a national tragedy such as this. I've never really been through, a horrific crime such as this. So maybe memory, is not all that reliable. So with RFK, you had, what's her name? Nina Rhodes. Nina Rhodes said, there was another shooter next to her, the security guard. But that in and of itself, wouldn't necessarily prove anything, I suppose. But it's that this eyewitness testimony that's genuine and immediate, it corresponds to the ballistic evidence that follows.
Yeah.
So Ronald Reagan was shot from a different type of bullet. How he acts afterwards, it corresponds to that. When he arrives at the hospital, he's able to walk into the hospital. He's not even sure that he was shot. Had he been shot with the .22 the way that the other people involved were, he would have been on the floor, and his wounds would have been very obvious. At the hospital, they couldn't even find the bullet.
Well, let's take a step back here.
Sure.
The Secret Service and their role in this. Fletcher Prouty, in his book on JFK assassination, said that the key thing when you investigating if it's an inside job or not is the violation of standard operating procedure.
Exactly.
The violation of standard operating procedure. And in your book, you talk about the Secret Service and how the presidential limousine was when he pulled up to the hotel, it was following procedure.
Right.
But the limousine was moved some 40 feet away.
That's correct.
Okay.
When they arrive at the Hotel Hilton, they go up to one specific entrance, and when they exit after the speech, they come out of the same door. When they arrive at the hotel, they are following procedure. They pull right up to the door, that way that it's a straight shot, to the entrance of the hotel. He is followed on both sides of him in a diamond-shaped formation by the Secret Service. However, on their way out, for whatever reason, that limo is about 40 or so feet down the street. Now, that might seem like a short distance to me and you, but we are not in the world of Secret Service.
Yeah, they eat, breathe, and sleep security, right?
And they will wait, for just a matter of inches or 1 foot. This is 40 feet, down the street. They're no longer in the diamond formation that they were when they were entering the building. And it should be noted that, no one's telling the Secret Service car that they need to move, right? It's not like when we park in a handicapped spot or in front of a fire hydrant. This is the Secret Service. No one gets to tell them that they need to move a little bit down the street. So that means that someone put a key in an ignition, put the car from park into drive, and drove down the street. When they come out of the hotel, they are no longer in a diamond formation. They're on one side of Reagan. And maybe all this is circumstantial. However, remember, this happens just before the assassination attempt. Right. So you would have to really believe in, flagrant incompetence in our Secret Service happening coincidentally right before this assassination attempt.
Right, and plus what's not circumstantial is the amount of bullets, right? So you can't call that circumstantial, right? If there's more bullets fired, than were even possible in his gun. And remember, there is video footage, so we know that, in no way did Hinckley reload his gun or anything like that. No one makes that claim, right? The main approach is simply to just ignore those extra bullets. But each one is accounted for as we list out in the book.
Let me stop you let me check something.
Sure.
Let me stop you real fast here for a technical thing. Just hold on a second.
Okay.
Thanks. That just had a technical difficulty with the volume. Okay, where were we?
We were again covering Hinckley's bullets and how all of his bullets are accounted for without having the bullet that was supposed to have hit Reagan. So there is an extra bullet, okay. Right? And that really jumps out of the realm of circumstantial or supposing and all that, because everyone agrees that he did not reload his gun, right? Because there's footage and no one makes the claim he reloaded his gun. So we list them all out. What happened to all of his bullets? So.
Now, obviously, the Reagan assassination isn't as well known, especially among conspiracy theorists, but is not really as well known as, let's say, the JFK assassination or the RFK assassination. But if you are familiar with those, it really helps to understand the assassination on Ronald Reagan. For instance, a lot of things kind of come back. He was just talking about the amount of bullets, the eyewitness accounts. If you might remember with RFK, too many bullets were fired that could have come out of Sirhan's gun. And there's picture evidence of this. There's picture evidence of all the different bullet holes. His six-shooter is making 15 holes, roughly. Same thing happened with the JFK assassination. The other thing is different types of bullets. With JFK, you had something called a fractional bullet or an exploding bullet. If you ever see the Zapruder film, you'll see that his head, not to sound morbid, but his head almost looks like it explodes. Well, this is almost the opposite of that. The bullet that hits Ronald Reagan is something much smaller. According to Ronald Reagan himself, the doctor, the nurse, and just video footage. If you look at the assassination attempt, he does not seem to be hit by the same type of bullet that hit the other people, which is why he wasn't even certain that he had been shot in the first place.
Right, because the doctor, the nurse, Reagan himself, all describe it as like a dime-shaped disc, right, with jagged edges. And that's more consistent with a flechette gun, like a CO2-powered flechette gun, which would, if shot from the roof, right, because remember the NBC reporter said there was a second shooter on the roof, on the Bush-Hinckely, that, it would not get that. I mean, obviously, if I shot a CO2 propelled, flechette right next to you with nothing else going on, you would notice it, but not when there was all commotion and gunshots and things like that. It's very easy to shoot that without anyone noticing. But obviously, the NBC reporter did notice, but we don't know if that was because of sound or just from sight. But yeah, so that is consistent, and that is something that was developed that is used by the CIA along with other guns. I'm sure you've heard of the heart attack gun that they actually showed in open Congress.
During the church committee.
Yeah, during the church committee.
It should also be noted that a D.C. hospital is very familiar with gunshots and gunshot wounds. I mean, not to be flippant.
It's not Boise, Idaho.
It is not Boise, Idaho. So they, at first, did not think that he had been shot. It took 3 x-rays, and they couldn't even find the bullet. It was after all this that they finally found this small pellet. They actually thought that he had a heart attack because of this. And the doctor afterwards that night said that it was described the bullet and also described the angle, a 45-degree downward angle, which contradicts, just the placement of where John Hinckley Jr. was at the time.
Because he was level with Reagan.
Exactly.
In front of him, if ever. Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
Now, this bullet in quotation marks, or this object, this disc, that's forensic evidence. I'm sure the FBI took it and secured it, so we can go to the Reagan Library and see it, right?
Doctor handed it off to a federal agent, and it has gone the way of the windshield of and the JFK assassination. That had a bullet,
or his brain for that matter,
or his brain for that matter. Yeah. It goes along with the Ark of the Covenant. At the end of Indiana Jones.
Yeah.
It goes where those things go.
Now,
exactly.
So the bullet, the alleged bullet that supposedly almost killed the president, was not submitted as evidence in the trial?
No, absolutely not. It was never seen from again.
Now, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not an expert. That's if that evidence can be manifested, why wouldn't it be presented?
It's a very, very good question.
Right. Yeah, they did not have it, and they seem to get a pass in these events where, and I don't know how you feel about 9/11 and all that stuff, but there was like in the 9/11 when they reported Building 7 falling before it actually fell. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Well, it was a very confusing, very disturbing day, so it obviously gives you the power of prediction when that happened.
Exactly. Right. Yeah, in their press release, they said, it was a confusing day. They even claim to not have footage. They're like, we lost our footage, even though it's backed up like 6 different ways,
Yeah.
right? If anyone that's ever worked with television.
There are several reports that the BBC one is the one that most people cite with Jane Stanley.
Yes, correct. Yeah.
There's a local Fox affiliate here. I live near D.C., and they're reporting the same thing. And you have the two people in the two anchor women, and they say Building 7 has collapsed. And as the woman's reporting the collapse of the building goes down, and she goes, there it goes now.
I mean, she may just be in the wrong business. She may just have a second career as a clairvoyant.
Right. Or a telekinetic demolition expert.
It's like, but anyway, go.
No, that's really good. I mean,
we digress. But go ahead.
Yeah.
You did ask a pretty interesting question earlier. Is why was this not brought up in trial?
No, I mean, this is also similar, by the way, with Timothy McVeigh. The videotapes weren't used in his trial.
Videotapes, the Ryder truck.
Yeah, they were never submitted.
He went to go rent a Ryder truck, and the person behind the counter said he was not here alone.
Yeah.
Not to mention the witnesses of multiple other people. There was, other, I think people of like Middle Eastern descent kind of thing.
Yeah. But anyway, again, that's just I'm pointing out just similarities again. Just go, continue. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, please. It helps us not ramble. The best way I think to kind of look at these types of things is the same way that you might have a drug lawyer. Drug empires provide attorneys for their lower, their
mid-level managers.
Their mid-level managers, right? And part of that attorney's job is not just to provide the best legal defense that money can buy. It's also to conform that particular defendant's defense so that it doesn't ruffle too many feathers, and it certainly doesn't bring down the drug kingpin who's paying for that defense. So in this case, John Hinckley Jr., this is a criminal trial, right? There's many attorneys to choose from. His attorney is Edward Bennett Williams, who, those who are kind of interested in Watergate that might recognize that name as the defense attorney for the Washington Post. And he's basically a CIA attorney whose name comes up a lot in their defense. In the defense of, I think, Richard Helms in his accusation of the murder of Allende. So, this is not a random defense attorney who, is interested in truth, justice, and the American way.
Right, and it's another connection, too, between the Bush and Hinckley families. Exactly. He was used heavily when Bush was head of the CIA. So the CIA kind of connects them to the Hinckleys in two ways. Obviously, they funded World Vision, and then also they had this lawyer that was loyal to them that was then given to the Hinckleys to defend him. So
if he is a CIA attorney, he really is a drug lawyer then, isn't he?
Exactly.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No. That.
That more technical difficulties, but heck, you're on the other side of the country, so we can't complain too much.
Exactly.
So okay, where were we? Edward Bennett Williams. I think that's what we were talking about.
Right. So he was the defense attorney for John Hinckley Jr., but he was not, a yellow pages type of defense attorney. He was a CIA defense attorney. He was the Washington Post attorney during Watergate. He defended the Richard Helms during the assassination attempt trial of Allende. The best way to kind of look at that would be the same way that a drug empire has. They have their own attorneys, not just to defend the low-level person who was on trial, but also to guard or protect the people who are higher up that have more at stake.
And okay, so here we have this well-connected, very powerful. I think he also was the owner of the Baltimore Orioles, so he was a big player. he's a CIA lawyer representing Hinckley. Of course, Hinckley family has money, so it's not surprising that they could hire a good attorney for him. But this guy,
Right.
I'm sorry, go
Of a
ahead.
good attorney. It's not just a matter of a good attorney. It's the right attorney, if you will.
But the
Right.
prosecutor was was it Charles Ruff?
Yes, he was also involved with the Watergate affair.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, look at Jim Hogan's Secret Agenda, which is a pretty good book on the Watergate affair. You'll kind of see that a lot about Watergate, or another one called The Real Watergate. You'll see that a lot of the Watergate affair wasn't just about exposing the corrupt practices of Richard Nixon. It was really about bringing down Richard Nixon while at the same time keeping a tight lid on investigation, so that people who were setting him up never really received the full force of prosecutorial wrath. And on the other side of it, they were very much protected. So that's that's basically the modus operandi of these situations, is that certain people will get a certain level of prosecutorial wrath, but it's very contained and it's very directed and it's very intentional. It's not really just a standard trial with regular attorneys and prosecutors.
Right, and we talk about money too. Remember too that John Hinckley had all sorts of money, and of course he came from a family with money. But when they investigated, they actually report. They say that he got money from his family and other sources. But of course, the man never had a job in his life, right?
What are the other sources?
Exactly. Right. We don't ever get to hear about that. They just drop that.
But he's staying in hotel rooms. He's flying on airplanes. He's buying guns and ammunition. He's buying gasoline. And ostensibly, if he's a human being, he's also buying food.
Right. Food and gas. And he's having to do this in multiple states because remember, he was following the Carter, the Carter, campaign. Right, for his campaign for re-election, he goes and he got to one point where he had a whole set of guns on him. He never really got a clear shot during one of his speeches. Didn't get close enough, and then they ended up finding him in the airport, and they ended up saying, "Hey, you got like 3 or 4 guns here with a bunch of ammo."
Now, Tim, if this were happening to you, right? You're caught at the airport with an arsenal of guns around the same time that the president of the United States is in town running for, re-election. I don't know exactly what would happen to you,
It would not be good, though.
It would probably not be very good, and you would, in the very least, spend a few nights in jail. John Hinckley Jr. is released within 36 minutes of this.
Right.
He is not fingerprinted, and Carter's Secret Service is not notified of this, of this interaction.
Right, and when we say the president was there, remember too, we're talking about like Tennessee. We're not talking about New York City or D.C. where that's just more the norm. So it definitely is very suspicious to to be caught like that. So,
36 minutes. I've had traffic stops that have lasted longer than 36 minutes.
Yeah, they won't give me my license.
Okay, so we have all this odd occurrences, inexplicable. He seems to be getting a pass, which is a telltale sign of some sort of intelligence operation. If you investigate these things, these are all signs patterns that we know to recognize. We recognize if we familiar how these things go down. So, John Hinckley, what is he exactly? In the book you bring up MK Ultra. This is he some sort of mind-controlled patsy? What's going on here?
Well, okay. Maybe you start with that. Okay.
Up until this point, I just want to be clear that, we've tried to stay very close to forensic evidence, eyewitness accounts, and the like.
And ballistics.
But it is very hard to tell this story without explaining something that, might be considered preposterous or in the very least obscure or on the fringe, of a kind of conspiratorial history. But at the same time, that's not our fault.
Right. And so, obviously, obviously MK Ultra has its earmarks on it, right? So we talk about Mark David Chapman, we talked about earlier. We didn't really close the loop on that discussion because essentially what World Vision was doing, in addition to assembling CIA assets, they were also assembling assassins. And so, that's why the similarities between John Hinckley and Mark David Chapman are so interesting, because you have these trigger words, these trigger sentences, like in the case of, the Catcher in the Rye scenario. And so there are definitely certain earmarks to there. And a lot of people would think, well, okay, we understand Mark David Chapman, right? Because he's essentially, kind of a loner nut guy that would be easy to play the part of the loner nut assassin, right? And, he's there doing some very, very low-paid work for World Vision, right? Doing volunteer work in various different countries. And so people understand that a little bit more. But when we start talking about John Hinckley Jr., and then they say, well, hold on a second. Here's a highly connected, wealthy family. Why would they involve their son in such a thing? And I think this really kind of plays to the fact that, the average person has a different set of ethics and a different perspective than the people that are in power. Anyone who's studied ancient cultures has known that pretty much every culture sacrifices their children in one way or another, right? So some ancient cultures have, put their children in the fire, right? The Bible even talks about that. Where, they put them alive and burnt them alive, and, for status within their society. So, John Hinckley Jr. was never a John F. Kennedy Jr., for example, right? He was always a kind of ne'er-do-well, never amounted to anything, didn't do anything really with the connections that he had in his upbringing. So, now there was a purpose for him. There was a function he could play. And at the end of the day, right, we have to remember that even though he shot the king and missed, right, so to speak, or at least was presented that way.
It wasn't all that bad.
Wasn't all that bad. I mean, the guy basically spent a decade in a country club. You know what I mean? That, yes, he couldn't leave, but it was essentially a country club. The facility that he was in was, just the standard of living that he had there was just better than the vast majority of people alive today.
A lot of off-site visits.
A lot of off-site visits. Early on. I mean, within a couple of months, he was having off-site visits, and that just expanded until today, where he's just making a monthly check-in. So it wasn't really that much of a sacrifice. So I don't know, if that jives with kind of your perspective on this, but
yeah, we're talking. So you're talking about elite deviancy.
Exactly.
And no people. Again, it's one of those things where you have to understand how the elite live, and the average person has no idea. You alluded to that about the ethics and different values that the elite may have, especially the Bush family, which you could say are kind of servitors to the super elite. So
exactly. Yeah. If you think about the two political parties, right? So the way it typically works is that Democrats are farmed, meaning that they develop those people for 20, 30 years, right?
Jimmy Carter.
Jimmy Carter, Bill Clinton, and Obama are the best examples of this, because each of them credited someone who basically was a lackey for the bankers, like Carroll Quigley in the case of Clinton, and Zbigniew Brzezinski in the case of Obama, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Carter also was a similar situation, right, where he was a Southern face with the Southern accent that they were able to found the Trilateral Commission with. And so in each of these cases, these people are kind of like cultivated, and they're wholly owned by the structure on the Democratic side. Now, on the Republican side, it's a little different, where they typically get kind of mid-level managers that are part of the establishment to take those posts. So they have different purposes for different presidencies. So that just it seems to be what happens. There are exceptions. There are some exceptions to that, but usually those exceptions get shot, like in the case of Reagan. Reagan didn't really fit either of those molds, but he was shot 3 months into his presidency. So
I would like to give some context, if you don't mind, because we're talking about MK Ultra and Patsy assassins, and to people very familiar with conspiratorial history with RFK, that might they might be very familiar with those things, but people who aren't, MK Ultra is a CIA program, or rather it was the umbrella name for a CIA program. After World War II, the America and Russia were fighting over all these Nazi scientists. Some of them were aerodynamic or missile experts, weapons experts, but a lot of these Nazi scientists that America was bringing over after World War II were psychological experts, interrogation experts. And the CIA helped, through something called Project Paperclip, set up all these Nazi scientists all in all these different universities, all these different universities and hospitals all over the country, some in Canada. And for decades, they were basically spent millions of dollars, did all these tests, and to basically find out the answer to the question, could you control someone's mind? They wanted to see, could we destroy somebody's memory if a CIA agent was, retiring? Could we destroy their memory? Could we kidnap
Could we selectively destroy their memory? And that's where they had the hardest time, was getting people to they can wipe out people's memory, right? And that's why usually after these assassination attempts, typically the shooter gets taken to like a naval intelligence outpost. That's what happens. People say, oh, this is just something that is kind of cartoony or something like that. And the reality is that a lot of the goals of MK Ultra were not able to be realized, right? They found out that they really could not control people down to a specific degree, where you get someone to perform a specific action, and 2 years down the road, based off of a trigger that they see in a newspaper, that kind of stuff is really for the movies more than for reality. But what they found that what's very easy to do is to get someone to be a patsy, get someone to be in a spot where something's going to go down, and even get them to pull out a gun and pull a trigger, and then forget about it afterwards. That's the main that was one of the main accomplishments of MK Ultra. And so that's why, because remember, they tried to get MK Ultra, and again, we're kind of getting into this story in our next book, which is sort of a prequel to Bush Killing Reagan, about killing Ford, where they sent multiple shooters to go kill Ford, but none of them were successful, right? And so what they realized that they really need to do is they need to use them not as a skilled shooter, but as a patsy, to be there and to have at a distance, to have a sharpshooter with either a flechette or a long-range rifle, and to finish the job. So that's what was done in really John Lennon, which happened only a few months prior, was really a trial balloon. That's a point we kind of make in the book. Is that, they went and did that. John Lennon, I mean, the book you were referencing about John Lennon kind of makes it sound like John Lennon's a little bit more important than he was at the point in his career. I don't necessarily think that he was the goal. Maybe he was useful to kind of get rid of somebody that can't be fully controlled, that has a say in pop culture. They always like doing that, but it was really a trial balloon to set up to make sure they had all the details sorted. And then, we saw the Reagan assassination followed a very similar thing. We had a patsy in nearby, and you had from a distance you had a shooter. So.
Mm-hmm. And more recently, you see it with the underwear bomber. You see these type of behavior, and also you see eyewitness accounts that contradict a lone nut. You see these kind of trends pop up again and again in more recent history. So this is not, even though this happened a long time ago, this is very much, affects our day-to-day lives and news reports that come out.
Right, and the reason why they always have to have handlers again is because the more cartoony aspects of the MK Ultra goals were never realized. But in the case of the underwear bomber, what did he really do? Right, he just kind of mindlessly went along while people from the State Department were kind of making sure he got through security, right? And so that's not a complicated thing to do. And anyone who's seen, I don't know if have you ever been to a like a mentalist or a what do you call hypnotist event?
I'm familiar with it, where they get some quack like a duck or something on stage. Yeah.
Right. And it is real. I've seen people forget the number 2, where they, he gets these, I've seen people that absolutely were under control of an entertainer. We're just talking about an entertainer, and
a short amount of time.
And he has to, he can't use drugs or lock them up or anything like that. And in a few minutes, he got this woman to forget the number 2 and says, "Oh, well, how many breasts do you have?" And she goes, 1. And then she looks confused. And then after a couple of seconds, she says 3. And, it's just her whole life she's gone through knowing what the number 2 was. And now she doesn't. and this was with no prior drugs or training or anything like that.
If you see those people too afterwards, they're talking to their family. They are really genuine. I mean, if they were just part of the act on stage, you see them with their friends and their family afterwards, and they're genuinely bewildered with what there was in the show. They buy DVDs to see how ridiculous they were, because they themselves do not believe it.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
So, of course, with MK Ultra, what you had there was this massive umbrella program with, I think, like 150 sub-projects, which included a lot of things. One was this maybe development of a mind-controlled assassin, mind-controlled patsy. It involved LSD, sexual abuse, hypnosis, sleeping deprivation, torture. The targets were college students, unwitting, in many cases some were witting, like Ted Kaczynski, by the way.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Military personnel. Patients, prisoners, and maybe sons of the elite, as you said, sacrificing their sons to the elite. It's something that's
exactly. Not the pick of the litter, but they'll give you the runt of the litter, I mean, and say, all right.
Motive. I think the obvious thing: you kill the king, you become the king if you're the next in line. But this, in your book, you end it with you're spelling out the differences between Reagan and Bush. Reagan campaigned in 1980. He was thunder on the right. He was a populist conservative, and he spoke against the trilateralist, sort of like the Rockefeller style of conservatism.
Right.
And Bush was a trilateralist.
Right. And
Bush ends up on the ticket. That's a factor in this assassination attempt. Do you want to go into that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a huge factor. Well, first of all, it's not just that he vaguely criticized the Trilateral Commission, right? It was much more to the point in the primary. Remember, and this shows how far we've come in politics the last couple decades. But George Bush, Ronald Reagan actually calls out George Bush in the primary about his association to Trilateral Commission, and there's video footage of this. It's actually great. It's just great to see George Bush squirm at this point, because he goes. His basic response was that he goes, there's lots of conspiracy theories. JR was part of the Trilateral Commission, and we're making reference to some TV drama. And then he goes on to say that, when I started to run for president, I canceled all my business associations. Right now, Trilateral Commission is absolutely not a business association. It is, it's the same thing as the Council on Foreign Relations. It's just a organization meant to, subvert the national sovereignty of the country and all that.
Yeah, David Rockefeller started it with Zbigniew Brzezinski in 1973.
Right, and Carter. Carter was the third.
Yeah, Carter was the trilateralist pick. Yeah, right.
Yeah, exactly. Well, he's even listed as one of the three founders. At least some sources list him as that. And so you had a trilateral president with Jimmy Carter. Then you had a very popular Ronald Reagan railing against the Trilateral Commission.
Well, actually, here's how influential it was. I'm sorry. I think at the time it had like 89 American members, 35 to 40 of whom ended up in the Carter administration.
Yes.
Okay,
Right.
Okay, so go ahead.
Exactly. So Carter almost used it. For his high up positions, he he used it as almost like a litmus test. The whole focus was on merging Europe with North America and with Asia, and make a trilateral world, so to speak. So Carter's all of his appointments to Trilateral Commission. Reagan made it very clear that he did not trust the trilaterals, and he resisted making appointments that were trilats. And so then how does he get on the ticket? Well, the way that maneuvered was, so Reagan was obviously finally about to win the nomination, but you really do need more than the nomination. You need the money, and the money comes from the banks, and that's every one of these people that run have to get their money from the banks.
If you don't, you end up like Goldwater in '64.
Exactly. Oh yeah, the amount of media that they bought, and they got every newspaper to say that that he was mentally unstable, and they just went nuts on him, and which of course is not the case. Now, okay, so now how does he get on the ticket? So what ended up happening is obviously he needs that money. Then he started hearing rumblings of the bankers having to, because in order to get the banker money, they had other people besides George Bush to float, and so they floated with him. They floated Gerald Ford, right?
I remember that. Yeah.
Think about it. Right. Which actually Gerald Ford would make a decent VP in terms of, VPs are not supposed to get too much attention. They're supposed to be, just boring and kind of like, make you feel safe and like milquetoast and yeah. And so no one would really be too worried about Gerald Ford stepping in since he had already been president. But that does make it a little awkward, right? Because then you both get referred to as Mr. President and it becomes like a dual presidency, right? It can get viewed that way. So I think Reagan definitely did not want that, and then basically figured that George Bush would be the lesser of two evils, so to speak. Not necessarily that he was less evil, but just that it would be would not be as bad, and he could try and relegate him to VP status and not let him take over the White House. But of course, that only lasted for about 3.5 months, and then when he was shot, and remember too, George Bush was in charge of the investigation. As Frasier brought out, he ran this special team, and the National Security Decision Directive. He ran the special security group and was able to sweep this under the rug. And the power of George Bush became evident, and the determination of his backers. Because remember too, it wasn't just his one attempt, right? Because you also had Ford. Remember, Ford had 2 attempts on his life, and they're also with the MK Ultra earmarks. So, Ronald Reagan knew that this came from the intelligence community, right? He understood that, because remember, both of those shooters of Ford were tied to Manson. We're going to get into this in our next book. They were essentially Manson girls. In the official story, one of them isn't, but she came from the same hometown as him in West Virginia and all that. They're clearly both connected to, and they were childhood friends and all. Second?
Yeah, one was Lynette Skookie Fromm. I forget the name. Was it Parker? Something? Sarah Jane or something?
Jane Moore was the other one.
Sarah Jane Moore is the other one. Now,
yeah.
Sarah Jane Moore. Can you hear us? Yeah. So, Sarah Jane Moore is not typically thought of as a Manson girl, but the other one is. Squeaky Fromm is known as being associated with Charles Manson. Now, but Sarah Jane Moore grew up in a very small town in Charleston, West Virginia, right? And grew up.
Escort, but the guy who runs like a candy store. The guy ran like a candy store in that area said that both Charles Manson and Sarah Jane Moore as children would come to in his store.
Would hang out in his candy store and all that stuff. So they knew each other from there when they were children. So so they both really are connected to Charles Manson, who was a CIA, who was funded by the CIA, and so Ronald Reagan knew this, and so, after the assassination attempt, he ends up filling up his staff with Trilateral Commission members. Bush really starts to take control of the White House, and of course we have a huge the national debt quadrupled, and federal spending.
Also, Tim, you mentioned earlier about the CIA being drug dealers. Well, it was around this time that a lot of people might have heard of Iran-Contra, but the other side of Iran-Contra would have been, the billions of dollars of CIA cocaine that was allowed to come into this country and converted into crack cocaine, brought into places like Mena, Arkansas, and whatnot. So all of those things that were really CIA operations, we all know that George H.W. Bush was the head of the CIA, and was, really grew up in the CIA, that all of those types of operations, the Sandinistas, all those CIA operations that we've come to associate with the 80s, all those things happened after this assassination attempt.
Right. Yeah, and as the head of the National Security Council, Bush was supposed to be responsible for that, but he was claimed he was out of the loop.
Right.
And that was Oliver North, of course, working with Barry Seal and one Bill Clinton in Arkansas.
Exactly.
And that involves, of course, that then with Barry Seal, you can he's associated with David Ferry and suppose he was a pilot involved, maybe flying out some of the conspirators or something. Course,
right, and we've all heard stories of him as governor, throwing wild cocaine parties and whatnot. And but no one ever mentions the fact that the governor of Arkansas made less money than the mailman. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The guy who delivered mail or something like that. Made like $40,000 a year or something. And so cocaine is expensive. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And but obviously it was an easy supply because essentially what they did is they brought in the drugs. They emptied out these CIA hangars in Mina. They filled them up with basically money and guns. And then, the money and guns went down to basically arm and fund the Contras, which were essentially, the protectors of the drug trade. You know what I mean? And I mean, we see the same thing with Fast and Furious. That same program has continued.
Right, trade guns for drugs.
Drugs, guns, destabilization, and basically you create an arena where all this destabilization is occurring. And I don't know what the end game is. It could be just wreaking havoc and making money from it. I don't know, out of chaos or something. But, of course, if you report this, the reason why people aren't generally familiar with this is because all the successful establishment journalist reporters don't report this stuff. And if you do, you end up like Gary Webb with 2 bullets in your head that you apparently, shoot yourself twice in the head.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, you may be, you mentioned earlier about, Oliver North. And, those people, and Bill Clinton, obviously. Well, a lot of times people might get caught with, let's say, a half a pound of cocaine, and the rest of their lives are not the same. This was billions of dollars of cocaine. Basically the whole crack epidemic of the 1980s can basically be tracked to, these CIA operatives. And yet Oliver North didn't go to jail. Bill Clinton didn't go to jail. None of these people went to jail. A lot of them, their entire careers. Oliver North has a show on History Channel right now. They become sort of elevated in our society and protected. And I don't think that those things are unrelated. Similar with Eric Holder more recently with Fast and Furious.
No,
exactly.
I remember back in the 80s, I got Oliver North's autograph. So I at the time I did not know what was going on. Not in Mina or they're running cocaine. If you told me at the time, of course, that the CIA was running cocaine in from Central America, I would have called you a communist. But then again, I was young and